Hello, my name is Stephen Policastro, and I'm here with our MC tonight, James Stroud, and welcome to our presentation with Dr. John Sanford and student Ashley Earnshaw. We're going to be talking about many different topics tonight. We're going to be looking at Contested Bones, a book that Dr. Sanford co-authored, as well as a few fun facts about Adam and Eve, as well as genetic entropy. So we are in for an exciting night tonight. Thank you all so much. For those who can join us live, and for those watching this recording, we're glad that you're able to tune in as well. Again, my name is Stephen Policastro, and I am the founder and director of International Association for Creation. We're a global Christian ministry that provides biblical worldview education to national organizations, education organizations around the world. Right now, we are focusing on creation tours of secular museums, specifically at the Smithsonian, which is really exciting. And we're so glad that you're able to join us here to learn more in depth about a few topics tonight. And I'm going to pass it on to our MC, James. Again, thank you so much for joining us tonight, and we hope you enjoy the presentation.
All right, welcome. Like Stephen said, I guess I'm the MC, even though Ashley's going to be playing a little bit more of a role, so you won't have my voice quite as much as you did last time, which you'll probably be thankful for. I'm sure many of you probably tuned in. The last one of these we did was the end of May with a much more in-depth one with Dr. Russell Humphreys on cosmology and John Bumgarner on geophysics. And we're looking to continue that going forward because that event was so successful. And with Stephen and IAC. And Stephen will be telling you a little bit more about that later and how you can kind of get signed up, plugged into IAC. And Logos Research Associates, in which Stephen and I both are associated with, is where Dr. Sanford is actually the president. And again, this group's comprised of over 50 PhDs from a variety of disciplines and who all share a passion on creation, science, and most importantly, Christ. And just really quickly, just reading you what Logos Research Associates is kind of all about. And again, I'll encourage you to check out their website. Lots of, continually updated, lots of good stuff there. Is basically their little mission statement is, as scholars and scientists, we delve deeply into the scientific conversations which affect Christian belief and unbelief. We're doing high quality, original research that can challenge many academic dogmas of our day in areas such as cosmology, geology, genetics, and archaeology, etc. We're building national and international collaborative research teams, and we wish to effectively communicate our findings and the findings of others to people like you. And as ambassadors for Christ, we seek to encourage others to believe in Jesus, to faithfully and deliberately believe what Jesus taught, and to believe God's revealed word, the gospel, which is the power of God to salvation. So like Stephen was saying, tonight we have a real treat. Not only will Dr. Sanford be going through the genetics of Adam and Eve, and of course genetic entropy, which is his bread and butter, but he'll also be touching on Contested Bones, which is one of his more recent books, and you'll definitely have a chance to order a copy on the website that he'll talk about. And again, one thing that I'll just say very nice about this is everything is in color. It just makes it much easier to really look in at the detailed photographs, etc. And it was definitely long overdue. The Bones of Contention was a book that was first written, I think, in the 90s. I think they updated it either late 90s or really early, like 2001. But it's long overdue, so I can't recommend that book enough. And we're also going to have the co-author of that book, Chris Roop, should be doing one of these talks next month. So again, you'll want to get plugged into IAC, which Stephen will go over in more details about that at the close of tonight's event. And also, really quickly, just going to do a plug, still have a lot of material from the last talk, including Dr. Sanford's The Mystery of Our Declining Genes, which goes into a lot more of the detail of genetic entropy. Also, we have Dr. Bumgarner's Planetary Cataclysm. Same thing with Dr. Humphrey's Distant Starlight. These will all be sent to you at no cost. We'll go over that a little bit later. Stephen will. But for those who do register, just plug in. It's absolutely free to IAC. So again, I can't recommend enough for you to get plugged into that. And also, as an added treat tonight, Ashley will not only be sharing her thoughts on creation science, but she'll also be having a little bit more informal discussion with Dr. Sanford. So it's not going to be quite, as rigid or as formalized as a talk in person might be, which I think will be great. And she'll be bouncing off questions to Dr. Sanford throughout, from her generation, you might say, because I know Stephen is a millennial. Dr. Sanford, a baby boomer. I'm a Gen Xer, so I'm right there in the middle. And one thing that Dr. Sanford and Logos has been incredibly passionate about is making sure we all hold hands and learn from one another. And in the words of Francis Schaeffer, always discuss in the context of the present. So in other words, it's not good for a group to stay, let's say, in the 20th century when it's actually the 21st century. So I think it's a real good testament that, to bring in fresh voices, a new generation, and make sure that we're all talking the same language, so to speak. Now, I do have a temporary number for Q&A because at the end of tonight, we'll be taking all the questions and answers we can take until we run out of time. And the temporary number that I have set up here is 479-616-4520. Once again, that's 479-616-4520. And just text any questions or comments that you would like to have answered at the end of tonight's talk. And again, try to keep them either in the lines of genetic entropy or Adam and Eve or contested bones, some of the topics that Dr. Sanford will be discussing. And you can start texting those right now, all the way up until the time that we're actually in the middle of the Q&A. And with that being said, I think I've covered about all of it. So without further ado, I will turn the floor over to Ashley and Dr. Sanford.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Dr. Sanford. So glad you could be with us tonight.
My pleasure.
So I am Ashley Earnshaw, and I am a student of science. I'll give a brief testimony so that you guys kind of know why I'm here. I'm thankful to be able to have this opportunity to talk with Dr. Sanford. So I have an undergraduate degree in biochemistry. God opened the door for me to study that. And while I was at university, I had the opportunity to speak with many fellow students on various topics associated with creation and what the Bible says and why what our professors were saying was incorrect. So God blessed me with that. But my journey in creationism did not start there. Actually, I was very much blessed to grow up in a home that we learned creation from the very beginning. And my brother attended university long before I did, and he started having to struggle with professors on this topic. So I loved my brother, looked up to him. So I started reading his books behind him and started learning information. And that prepared me for when I would attend university and have to fight against or argue with and discuss with multiple other people on the creation science aspect. Also, God put into my life Dr. Russ Humphreys, who attends my church. I was very blessed. So anytime I had a question about physics or creation science, I could run to him and say, help, Dr. Humphreys, help me. And then also Dr. Sanford's books, Genetic Entropy and Contested Bones, have been great resources for me as I've had to write various and sundry papers, references, and to help give me the Christian perspective, the biblical perspective, when I would compare to the purely Darwinistic evolution perspective that I would get through the various research topics that I did. So Dr. Sanford, thank you for allowing me to talk with you tonight, and I'm looking forward to learning what you have prepared.
All right, super. So before I actually start and jump into the science, I want to put things first. And the real issue here is actually faith. We're saved by faith. And so this idea of believing God more and believing man less is really central to the controversy. And so we kind of lose track of that. Now, when you were in university, people were urging you to believe the experts, believe the professors, believe the authorities more. But on these issues that go beyond science, that include the spiritual realm, it's essential that we decide to believe God and to believe God more. That's huge. So, there's this famous verse in Exodus, in Genesis, excuse me, where it says, Abraham believed God, and God counted it to him as righteousness.
Yes.
Now that verse is repeated 4 times in the New Testament. The New Testament authors understood that this is at the core of the issue, is who do we put our trust in? And so that's the primary issue. The secondary issue is the science. So I'm going to give you a lot of science tonight, but it's really important to remember the science is there to support our faith, not to replace our faith.
Absolutely. Thank you for the reminder.
Okay, so I just want to start with a verse and a concept. First of all, spiritual war. For a lot of people, they don't really see that we're in a spiritual war. They don't necessarily believe that that Satan is real, or that demons are real, or that necessarily even God is real. But when we read the Bible, what we see is it's all about spiritual war. In fact, spiritual war begins on chapter 3 of the Bible, in Genesis, and it's spiritual war all the way up to chapter 20 of Revelation. So the only parts of the Bible that aren't about spiritual war are the first 2 chapters of the Bible and the last 2 chapters in the Bible. So that's incredibly important, because the dialogue that we enter into when we talk about creation versus evolution has a spiritual component.
Yes, it does.
And we experience that. I've experienced that as I've walked onto universities, or I've had discussions. I've sensed that this isn't just about science, it's very much about spiritual war. And I wanted to read to you a verse from 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, a very powerful passage. And so when I first read this as a young Christian, I was very disturbed by it. And now I'm disturbed not because I doubt it, but because I see that it's so true. So I'm going to read it to you, and it begins talking about the Antichrist. So this is Paul talking to the Thessalonians, and he says, "This man will come to do the work of Satan with counterfeit power and signs and miracles. He will use every kind of evil deception to fool those on their way to destruction, because they refuse to love and accept the truth that would save them. So God will cause them to be greatly deceived, and they will believe the lies.
Wow.
Then they will be condemned for enjoying evil rather than believing the truth." So,
wow, that is so powerful.
Yeah, it kind of gives me goosebumps, because it's a warning, and basically has to do with what we choose to believe determines our fate. And so this is New Living Translation. Other translations say it a little differently. Most of the translations say something like this. They did not love the truth, and so they believed the lie. If you love the truth and you love and trust God and His Word, the issues that we're going to discuss are not that difficult. But if you emotionally don't want to believe the truth, then you're going to find 101 reasons, 101 lies to believe rather than to believe the truth. So this, again, involves a spiritual war.
Yes.
So Ashley, we talked about this the last time we had a chance to talk. And I wanted people to be aware of this booklet. It's a new booklet that we've just published. And it's actually a very important book, but a very disturbing book. The title of it is The Sexual Holocaust. And you can see it says the sexual revolution, but the sexual revolution has actually turned into a nightmare.
Yes.
And it's devastating. It's damaging not millions but billions of people at the physical level, the emotional level, the social level, and the spiritual level. So it's huge. And so we can, it's really quite clear if you look at the data that this problem, the sexual holocaust, is causing the greatest humanitarian crisis in history.
Wow.
In all of history. That's how big it is. And it's not something that's slowing down, it's still accelerating. So it's a very frightening thing. So you can find out more about this at sexualholocaust.org, which is shown there on the slide.
And there is a free PDF on there, and I was able to read through it the other day, and it is powerful and disturbing simultaneously. And also encouraging, if you are a believer, that there is hope. So thank you for writing this book in conjunction with Bridget. It definitely is impactful.
I'm really glad you read it and realized how big a deal it is. A lot of people will want to turn away from it because it is bad news. And but it's like learning that World War III has just started. There are certain types of bad news you just have to receive so that you can be warned.
Yes.
And so that's what's going on here. And so my co-author and primary researcher is Bridget Heath. And she's scheduled to be talking to this group in a month or two. And she will go over this in detail. You might ask, why are we talking about this in the creation evolution controversy? Well, maybe it's just because this is more important to me than the creation evolution controversy. This is destroying humanity, and it's not just corrupting them in the physical sense. It's causing profound spiritual corruption. So thanks for letting me just introduce that topic. We're going to move on now to talking about science related to creation and evolution. And so there's a series of books that I've published in concert with other collaborators. And the three most impactful ones, I think, have been Genetic Entropy, which we're going to spend most of our time this session talking about genetic entropy, which has to do with the universal degeneration of life. And so I'm sorry, I'm hitting you with two really bad news stories. One is sexual holocaust. The second one is that genetic entropy, the truth is that we are all mutating and we're actually mutating to death, and that the human race is mutating to death. So thank God we have some good news, which is that we have the promise of heaven.
Amen. So true.
Yeah, but genetic entropy means that if you're looking for a humanist utopia, don't hold your breath.
Oh, yes.
Not going to happen. So the second book is called Biological Information, New Perspectives. It's a very technical book. Should be of great interest to people in information technology and people interested in robotics and these things, because it turns out that life is programmed like a computer is programmed. In fact, the living cell has both hardware and software, And the programming that goes into life is more sophisticated than any programming that's been developed thus far by man.
Wow.
And so it's a very exciting to study the question, where does biological information come from? In other words, who wrote the programming for life? And
Yes.
There was something like 29 authors who contributed to the proceedings. It's a huge, thick book. It would take you months to read it. I suggest you read the synopsis, which you can read in a few hours. You can access that at bimp.org. If all the techies in the world read this book, we'd have a revolution in terms of the discussion of is life design would be over. It's a very impactful book, but very technical. Just to give you a warning. The third book is Contested Bones. So the first book, Genetic Entropy, I wrote some time ago, and I spent many years doing the research. And so we conclusively show in Genetic Entropy that things are going down, not up. So evolution isn't happening in a positive sense, rather de-evolution is happening. And we can build a incredibly strong case for that. Now people say, well, you're obviously wrong because we have all these bones that are intermediate between ape and man, and that's a slam dunk. And so your theory is wrong because the bones prove that there's ape to man progression really did happen. That challenge caused Chris Roop and I to spend 4 to 5 years additional research to look at the contested bones, the bones that are supposedly intermediate between ape and man. And the result is this book, which is very, very comprehensive and shows on many levels that the bones that have been considered hominin bones, intermediate between ape and man, are consistently either true apes or humans who have undergone genetic degeneration. So genetic entropy actually folds into the why we see severely deformed skeletons in the fossil record. It's because certain populations that were highly isolated and inbred actually were degenerated, which is why things like hobbit man are small and deformed. And then the last thing is a number of the very important finds that are considered proofs of intermediate between man and ape turn out to actually be mixtures of bones. And so those mixtures of bones, you can see if you have a leg bone here and a jawbone there, you could say, oh, these bones belong together and one looks apish and one looks human, so therefore it must be an intermediate. But actually, a number of the supposed intermediates are actually just bones from different organisms that were found in together. So those 3 books are really impactful. I think they're all very highly sophisticated, very high level science, and yet we've tried to read them so that an average person can read them with, if they're diligent. If they're diligent and they skip over a few terms that are new to them, these are readable books, and yet they're loaded with information. So we're going to move on now. We're going to talk about genetic entropy. And genetic entropy, I've been told by a number of people, said this is the strongest argument against evolution and against Darwin. And so I believe that's true. Genetic entropy affirms scripture powerfully and proves that forward evolution is impossible. So you can learn more about that at geneticentropy.org. Now, one of the things that happens when you write technical books is you, 3 years later, you think, oh, I wish I had this new data, because now when I first wrote genetic entropy, I had a very strong case, but year after year after year after year, new things have been published by other people theorem, my book. And so, so the updates can be found at geneticentropy.org. There's lots of new evidence that you can find there. So down, not up is one way of saying what my thesis is. We're not evolving upward, we're going down, and it's something that's very clear. And it's very biblical because, you know, the Bible shows that God made a perfect creation, and then there was a fall, and the creation was profoundly corrupted, including the emergence of things like thorns and suffering and death and sin and all the rest.
Yes.
And so there's strong genetic evidence for the fall, which is just amazing. Not only does the evidence point away from evolution, it very much supports the biblical fall. Okay, now let me try to put this in context for you. Put it in the simplest way possible. There's two worldviews. First one is we're naturally going up.
Okay.
What I was taught until I was and believed until I was in my 30s. And that's the evolutionary point of view. Everything just keeps evolving and getting better. Or we are naturally going down. And I'm going to show that there, on 4 different levels, it's down, not up. So now we're naturally going down. Science tells us that all systems degenerate due to the problem of entropy. And I'm going to show that that's universally true and something we can trust. And the Bible has the same thing to say. It has very clearly says that man is degenerating and that basically we're moving toward an endpoint when we will be judged. And until then, we're basically becoming, we're degenerating rather than getting better. And this is consistent with what we experience personally. We are unfortunately experiencing genetic entropy, and maybe young people like you, Ashley, aren't there yet, but I can tell you as a 70-year-old, I'm very familiar with the problem of genetic entropy. So
true.
And then lastly, it turns out that not just people are subject to this entropic principle, but populations are. So the whole human race is undergoing increasing entropy. That's really strong. So the scientific view, we're going to just go through this quickly because it's so simple that once you get it, you can share it with your friends. The scientific view is that apart from intelligence, degeneration is universal. It applies energy. Okay, so we know that energy left to itself always dissipates and loses its power to do work.
Yes.
Second law of thermodynamics. And it's universally understood to be true all the time. Physical order has the same problem, and that's where we bring in the principle of entropy. Any ordered system, like a car or a computer or a house of cards, number one, it couldn't get there except through intelligence. And left to itself, it will always break down. You think of you buy a new car.
Yes.
And it's got a bunch of dings and scratches, but it still works. The question is, if you don't do anything to maintain that car, will it get better or worse? And
definitely worse.
So it's not too hard to understand the principle of entropy. It's all around us. So it turns out that information is also subject to entropy, corruption. And so you can see it when you play the whisper game, right?
Yes.
Or in the chain of command in the military, the message gets garbled along the way. So all of our laptops are going to be junk in a few years because of the problem of corruption of information. So living organisms clearly all age and death, and we all age and die. All living things do. And it's because of this basic principle of entropy, and it applies to populations. And that's the part where the evolutionists would go, oh no, that's not true. Populations can go on and on forever. And we're going to see that's not correct. Now let's, so science shows very clearly that all functional systems degenerate, what?
Mm-hmm.
Apart from intelligent intervention. So,
Very.
maybe even with intelligent intervention, you take care of your car, it's still going to end up in the junkyard, right?
Yes, it will.
But if, for example, there was not a fall, the intelligence of God could have sustained all things without degeneration. That's an interesting thing to think about, isn't it?
That is very interesting.
And it tells us a little bit about heaven might be like.
Yes.
Okay. So now let's jump to the next issue, the biblical view. Does science and the Bible agree? Well, on this point, they certainly do. The Bible says everything is wearing out and dying because of the fall. So here's a quote from 1 Peter. All people are like grass, and all their glory is like the flowers of the field. Grass withers and its flowers fall, but the word of the Lord endures forever. Okay, so basically we're fading flowers.
Yes.
and that's the way the Bible describes us.
Mm-hmm.
Here in Psalms 102, we see, you, Lord, in the beginning laid the foundations of the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. They will perish, but you remain. They will all wear out like a garment. Like clothing, you will change them, and they will be discarded. Okay, so that's a theme that runs through the Bible, is nothing of man is forever. Only the things of God are forever. And so since we're on the issue of what the Bible has to say about degeneration, let's look at the lifespans of the biblical patriarchs. Now, this is going to blow your socks off. Actually. Okay.
I'm holding on to him. Let's see.
So we know that that the Bible says that the early patriarchs lived to be ridiculously old.
Yes.
Well, I remember as a young Christian, I looked at those numbers and said, what are they talking about? This is a typographical error. No, and another typographical error. All these numbers that just seem impossible. And yet, when we look at the data and collect it and plot it, what we find is there's scientific evidence in the Bible that shows that man is degenerating. So take a look at this plot.
Oh,
okay.
wow.
Okay, so on the left are lifespans, and on the bottom are generations since Noah. So basically, the 9 generations before Noah were all living to be about as old as Noah. So something for the first 1,500 years after creation, something happened that caused human lifespans to degenerate rapidly and catastrophically. So as we look at this, you'll see some dots there that show wherever we find the age of people when they died and what generation after Noah, we plotted it, and those are the dots.
Right.
But I'm going to show you in red dots that show the key biblical players and how their ages line up. So Noah lived to be, according to the Bible, 950 years.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's pretty cool. You could do a lot in 950 years.
Absolutely. You're just getting started, Dr. Sanford.
If I was in Noah's time, I might feel like entropy would not be as highly advanced as it is now. So I'm more like the car that's ready for the junkyard.
Oh, I don't think so.
So Noah had a son, and his name was Shem. And the poor guy only lived to be 600 years old.
Yes.
I feel bad for him. And Abraham, many generations later, died at 175.
Right.
And then Moses died at 120. And David died my age, 70 years old.
Wow.
King David died of old age at 70 years old. Isn't it interesting that data is in the Bible?
Yes.
And that it formed what is clearly what's called a decay curve. This is a biological decay curve. Something is causing humanity to undergo rapid and radical degeneration such that people can't live as long as they once did.
Yes.
And so there's a final data point, which is how long an average Roman citizen lived average lifespan of a Roman citizen at the time of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
45 years. So
It's exactly on the line.
all the major players, all the major points are exactly, that line is called a line of best fit.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the probability, it's just an incredibly strong plot. And the data is like amazing. And it's not it's all in the same books of the Bible. This
Right.
is throughout the Bible. So it's not like the author of Genesis and the author of Exodus got together and worked these numbers out or made them up. The data just is striking. The Bible is revealing this, and what could explain it?
And there is an intelligent creator behind it all.
There's an intelligent creator who
An author.
who's pulled his hand back because of the fall and the corruption of mankind.
Yes.
And so what left to ourselves, this is what we expect. Unless we're under the wing of God, we will suffer degeneration. And if you don't mind me interjecting, not only is there a genetic degeneration going on, but there's also a moral degeneration going on.
Yes.
So I'm afraid, apart from God, everything just gets worse and worse. But this is the most amazing biblical data I've ever seen, and it's just stunning.
Okay,
let's
wow.
Coming back to the personal view, that was the biblical view. Now we're looking at the personal view. Here's something good news, not really. We are mutating to death. And this is something that geneticists agree on. Okay, we're dying primarily due to mutation accumulation. Not all of us are biologists, so I just want to make clear to people what a mutation really is. It is a typographical error in our genome. So our genome is basically the operating system of the cell. It is an information system, and it's made up like text. It's made up of letters. There's only 4 letters in the genetic alphabet. And one letter can mutate into a different letter, which creates a typographical error in the programming of life. And so now just consider this. You start out with a well-programmed or a well-written book. You start introducing errors, random errors. What's the likelihood the book will become better?
Very, very, very low. You'll lose information as you put errors in.
You systematically lose, even if there was some lucky typographical error that actually improved the text, which is vanishingly small, all the other errors would counterbalance that. So the net gain will be down, not up. Errors are overwhelmingly deleterious. They're bad. Mutations systematically destroy information, as you just said, and there are about 3 new mutations every cell division. So think about your cells are dividing every day. So this means we're mutating at a very rapid rate. So recently, a friend of mine said, you don't quite look yourself today. And I said, that's because I'm not myself. I just generated a few more million mutations today. And so our personal genetic degeneration is something we can all relate to. It's very personal. It is proof of genetic entropy. And so I'm going to just share with you a paper written by Dr. Michael Lynch. So Michael Lynch is probably the best known population geneticist in the world today. A big name in the area of genetics as it applies to not just individuals, but populations. So he wrote in a very prestigious journal, the National Academy of Science, Readings of the National Academy of Science, a paper on this problem of degeneration. And here are the conclusions of his research. First of all, an average cell in a 15-year-old, let's say just a typical skin cell of a 15-year-old, accumulated 6,000 mutations since the baby was, since the child was conceived.
Wow.
So there's trillions of cells in our body. And by the time we're 15, every one of those cells have about 6,000 mutations.
That's amazing.
That's a lot of lost information.
Very much
So by the time you're my age, you have about 40,000 new mutations.
Wow.
And so you can see that because it's a continuous loss of information, we're going down that up, and there's nothing that can reverse it. You can't fix these mutations. They're stuck in the genome. And so he concludes that mutation is the primary cause of aging and death. And I totally agree. It's very clear that some things wear out, like maybe your teeth or whatever, but the primary reason we age and die is because, well, let me just give you a personal example. Almost all of my systems are failing. And I'm not sad about it. I'm looking forward to heaven and to meeting the Lord. But my eyes are going bad, my ears are going bad, my back is bad, my heart is bad, my lungs are bad. And I won't tell you the other parts that are going bad, but it's down, not up. And so he concludes there's little potential for substantially increasing the upper limit of human lifespan. Basically saying, in fact, human lifespans have always stayed at about 120 through the centuries. And it's interesting because before the flood, God says, I will not contend with man forever. His time will be 120 years. That's really interesting. So at any rate, he's saying there's no technology that's going to overcome this problem of genetic degeneration.
I know this is a big market for cosmetics. Look younger, look younger, look younger. Use this cream, but ultimately it's not working because we are deteriorating.
If you work really hard, you can eat healthy and get exercise, and you maybe add a few years to your life, but none of us are going to get to be over 120. And it's even with high-tech stuff, like engineering is not going to save the day. We basically are in a downward decline that started at the time of the fall. Okay, so now isn't this an interesting picture? This is kind of me looking in the mirror in the morning. Is parts of me are still together. See, those are the 4 letters of the genetic alphabet, A, T, C, T. And they have to be in the right place to make me. But as I mutate, I just kind of am turning into a dysfunctional unit. It's happening to all of us, even young ladies like yourself, Ashley. I'm sorry to tell it to you, but the same process is happening, even in you. Yes. And so that is why we can be so glad for salvation and the promise of heaven.
Amen.
Now, this genetic entropy that happens in individuals, no one disputes it. Okay, there's no biologist in the world who questions this. Okay, so now we're going to jump to the population view. So we've talked about science proves entropy, genetic entropy should be real. The Bible indicates that it is real. The mirror tells us it's real. But lastly, the population will also undergo degeneration. So life itself is wearing out like a garment. Okay. Now, genetic entropy does not just cause the decay and death of individuals, because the reproductive cells in our body transmit mutations to our children. Okay. Now, by God's grace, our germline cells are mutating slower than the rest of our body. So I don't pass 40,000 new mutations to my kids. I only pass about 50 mutations to my kids. Okay. My wife passes on another 50. Between us, each one of our children have 100 new mutations. So basically, I inherited tens of thousands of mutations from my ancestors. They were passed on to me. Then I, in my own reproductive cells, generate another 100 mutations. And then all those mutations get transmitted to my wonderful children. And so, kids, sorry, but we all face the same problem. And so mutation accumulation happens from generation to generation. Okay, does that make sense?
Yes, sir. It's kind of scary to think about, but it's interesting that the germline does not mutate as quickly as the somatic cells.
Yes, our population would be extinct long time ago.
Okay.
But those cells are kind of like putting them in the refrigerator. They are kind of quiescent.
Okay.
And so they don't have as many cell divisions. Okay, let's keep going.
Okay.
The bottom line is because of this problem of accumulating mutations, in theory, all forms of life, people, dogs, bacteria, everything should be declining even to the point of extinction of a population. So when we talk about species that are millions or hundreds of millions of years old, we have to understand that genetically, because of genetic entropy, those claims of deep time are not viable. They're not credible.
Yeah.
You see how all these issues tie together? It's fascinating.
Yes.
Now, yeah.
Wow. Just seeing how many the mutations, and I don't understand how people could believe the long time frame, excessively long time frame of humans being on Earth if that is the rate of mutations, which I think you're going to keep going and talking on that. So I will stop talking.
No, but you're right. So you see what's coming is basically it's indefensible. When we talk about the earliest form of life occurred billions of years ago, and life just keeps getting better and better for billions of years, and until you finally bacteria turn into human beings. That's not even remotely credible. So again, talking about human genetic entropy, and this is affirmed by Michael Lynch. So he's totally honest. He understands the issue. He says the human race is definitely degenerating. He says there was roughly 100 new germline mutations per person.
Okay.
So each baby gets all the parents' mutations plus 100 more from mom and dad. All of us have tens of thousands of bad mutations that we've inherited. Sadly, 2 to 3% of babies have visible birth defects that are primarily due to genetic problems. There are thousands of classified genetic diseases like hemophilia, colorblindness. And for every classified genetic disease, there's countless unclassified genetic diseases that are just out there and don't show a clear symptom, and so you can't catalog them. So there's so much genetic damage in the human population, and it's tragic. It's not God's fault. It's because of the fall. God made a perfect creation. He gave us perfect bodies.
Yes.
Okay, so do other geneticists agree with me on this? They do. And the ones who have studied this the most agree most clearly. So Dr. Kondrashov was a Cornell University professor at the same time I was. I had a conversation with him about this issue because I was just starting to research genetic entropy, and I realized there was this huge problem. And so this is a private conversation, but he said, no human geneticist doubts that man is degenerating. And so he went on to NIH, and now he's at the University of Michigan. But he acknowledges there's a huge theoretical problem for evolution, and that is manifested in human degeneration, but also degeneration of all living things. Okay, Dr. Crow was a very famous geneticist in the last century, and I interacted with him just a little bit, but he's one of the top geneticists of the last century.
Okay.
So in his paper been published in Science, one of his last papers, he said, we're inferior to cavemen. Our fitness is declining at 1 to 3% per generation. Okay, and then coming back to Dr. Lynch, he said, no, we're degenerating at 1 to 5% per generation. And so there are a lot of geneticists, basically anyone who studies this can see the problem. It's pretty obvious. So at the end of genetic entropy, I have an appendix, appendix 1, where I just make a quote, scientist after scientist after scientist, who says this is a fundamental problem, and it puts evolution in it makes it hard to understand how evolution could possibly happen because it's so strongly down and so rarely up. Okay, so this is a plot. Is this too much?
Oh, no. This is fascinating. It's wonderful to hear.
Okay, so this is a plot. I just plotted what a 1% decline looks like over 300 generations. So fitness just means how fully functional is an organism. If you start with a fitness 1, it means a fully functional person. And if it degenerates 1% every generation, then after 300 generations, you can see that you've gone from almost perfect fitness to near extinction. 0 fitness means extinction.
Okay. And how long is a generation? I'm sorry.
So people kind of argue about that, but it's 20 or 25 or 30 years for human beings, depending upon the population.
Okay, thank you.
In that range. Yep.
Okay.
So from a biblical view, 300 is about the time from Adam to the present.
Okay.
That's why. So it suggests that in a biblical time frame, you could see this type of degeneration. But can you understand that if you have 1 million generations, you'd go extinct? Then you don't, there's not time. We're running out of time. You can't squeeze in millions of years. Doesn't work.
Yeah, it wouldn't fit.
It wouldn't fit. So it wouldn't fit my plot. So Dr. Michael Lynch, coming back to his paper, he says in the next few centuries, he says, we will see significant incapacitation at the morphological, physiological, and neurobiological levels. Okay, so he's saying humanity is going to be distinctly inferior to what we are right now. In just a few hundred years, unless Christ comes before that. That's a strong statement coming from an evolutionist who's one of the top scientists in the field. Okay, so as you can see, or I hope you can see, neo-Darwinian theory is collapsing. So can natural selection reverse entropy? People will say, well, there's lots of bad mutations, but they're all selected away by natural selection. And that's totally wrong. There are extremely rare beneficial mutations that happen. But overwhelmingly, mutations are, and selection does happen.
Yes.
So if you're born without legs, let's say, which happens, you have natural selection is a very high likelihood that you will not be able to survive and reproduce. So natural selection does happen. It's a no-brainer, but it can't do what's needed to stop degeneration. So adaptation happens also. For example, if you have a wolf breed, and some of those wolves go up to Alaska, and others go down to Mexico.
Yes.
There was a selection for heavier fur coat.
Oh, absolutely.
That's called microevolution. It's trivial, and it just has to do with fine-tuning a gene or two. It doesn't take a lot of new information. You're just fine-tuning. So yes, there are rare beneficials. Yes, selection happens on a kind of a gross level. Adaptation can happen, and yet populations are still degenerating because the beneficial mutations are too rare, selection is too weak, and the adaptation is too superficial. That's the bottom line. Okay, so our book shows Darwin's powerful delusion is false. So here's this thing that's been reigning over biology for over 150 years as an absolute fact. The ultimate fact of biology, they say, is evolution. And yet there's overwhelming evidence against this powerful delusion.
Wow.
Now, we've studied this issue from many different ways, but I think the most conclusive way to study it is doing what's called numerical simulations. Now, numerical simulations are very powerful research tools. It's kind of like this. If you were doing a study of cards, dealing cards out.
Yes, sir.
You could do it, but if you have to do millions of times, it would be really tedious and costly.
Yes.
But you can do that on a computer, right? You can just have virtual cards and you can make it happen in seconds.
Yes, absolutely.
So we can do, so that type of numerical simulation lets us calculate big numbers or big events very quickly.
Okay.
And we have worked with 5 other scientists, and we developed what I think is the most advanced numerical simulation of the mutation selection process, of the evolutionary process. And so we published maybe a dozen papers on this in professional journals. And we've shown that our numerical simulations are match biology. They're very realistic. They give the same results. And we can do experiments involving thousands of generations and billions of individuals. So we can do, big experiments. So the bottom line, we call this program Mendel's Accountant because we're basically counting genes as we go, as we analyze these programs. And it's like we call Mendel's Accountant the genetic accounting program that tracks every aspect of the mutation selection process. So it took, this is what took years of work and huge amount of effort, but it's been confirmed on many levels.
Wow.
So here's one of our results, one of our simulations. We're simulating a population's fitness. It could be a human population. In fact, we're modeling a human population. And we are using 200 generations, and we're using 100 new mutations per person per generation. So basically, we're using the human parameters. And you can ignore the green axis, but the red line is the fitness decline.
Yes.
So you'll notice that fitness decline looks a lot like the previous. We've seen 2 previous things. We've seen the biblical decline shown in the patriarchs, and we've seen that a 1% decline creates this type of degeneration. And so, and if there was more than 1% degeneration per generation, you would expect this to go down even steeper, closer to
a steeper angle and lower.
Yeah, so we have like 20 different parameter settings: population size, fertility of the population, size of the population. We can simulate any scenario that might interest us. What we see is whenever we add a significant number of deleterious mutations to the program, there's always, the fitness never goes up, even if there's some beneficials included. Fitness always goes down.
Wow.
And it always creates this type of biological decay curve, as is seen by just mathematics and is seen by the biblical data. It's stunning how strong our evidence is.
Wow.
So now we're going to go to one more level of evidence. And so I hope I'm not taking too much time, but it's a big deal. So for those people who are listening and maybe it seems a little too technical, be patient with me because I have really good news for you and really exciting news. And it's remarkably strong. And so it's worth hanging in there a little longer. The last evidence is actual biological experiments.
Okay.
Simulations you can do in a computer, and they are valid experiments, but they need to be confirmed by biological experiments. And so we can prove biologically that it is down, not up. And
okay.
Interesting. Okay, so we're going to first start with a very famous experiment, the long-term Lenski experiment. It was started more than 30 years ago by Dr. Lenski, and it was an evolutionary experiment. He had 12 flasks, and he took the same strain of bacteria and put it in all the flasks with an artificial medium, and he started to grow them. And every day he would transfer a little bit of each flask to a new flask, and so the population could grow and grow and grow forever. So for tens of thousands of generations, they have been doing this, mostly I think graduate students, because it's a bit tedious. And they have they have shown, well, they claim that they see evolution in action.
Uh-huh.
This is advertised in science textbooks and journals as the ultimate proof that evolution is true, and it happens quickly and easily. So let's take a closer look at this famous experiment. And I'll turn off my phone so it doesn't bother us. Go away, phone. Okay, so it turns out that when you actually study how this experiment turned out, it has actually demonstrates genetic entropy, and it demonstrates it powerfully. And you can read this about this at logosra.org.
Okay.
We have a technical paper on this that's very thorough and very, very convincing. Okay, so I'm going to go back. Let me say a little more about this. The actual bacteria were able to grow faster on the artificial medium.
Right.
And so that's not really surprising. It's a very simple adaptation to adapt to a new artificial medium to grow on. But they analyzed, they froze samples as the experiment went on, so they could kind of see which mutations were arising over time. So you kind of have a history of these strains. All 12 bottles ended up with 12 different strains.
Huh.
And all the different strains could grow faster on the glucose medium. But when they looked at the mutations that made them grow faster, they were all mutations that broke or deleted genes.
Huh.
And so how can that be? Well, think of this.
Okay.
You have a car.
Yes.
And you have a spare tire.
Yes.
And you're driving down the road.
Yep.
And you decide that you want to get better mileage.
Yes.
So you get rid of your spare tire.
Yes, make the car a little bit lighter.
Make it a little lighter. Now, have you lost something or gained something?
Definitely lost something.
But you're going faster. You're going. You basically, now let's suppose you want to get rid of the back seat. You go faster still, won't you? And
True.
And get rid of the radio and the air conditioning. You go faster, right?
Right.
And get rid of the emergency brake. And actually, you don't really need the hood or the back doors. So you can increasingly get better performance by getting rid of stuff.
Right.
So these bacteria were getting rid of important functions that would be useful apart from the artificial medium. In the natural world, they're jettisoning and losing functions and genes and information. And so it makes it look like they're evolving into something better, but they're actually getting worse. And if you put these in the natural environment, they would die right away.
Huh.
And so they actually were undergoing genetic degeneration, and they're still undergoing genetic degeneration.
Wow.
So I could spend an hour talking about this one thing, but bottom line is, if you look at our article, you will see that the Lenski experiment demonstrates degeneration, not evolution. And so Michael Behe, you maybe have heard of him. He's a wonderful scientist. He defends the idea that life is designed, and he's been doing parallel research to me. Both of us have concluded that biological systems must degenerate. He's also critiqued this famous experiment, and he's drawn similar conclusions and even gone further. He just wrote a book called Darwin Devolves.
Okay.
He further shows that the Lenski experiment is devolving, not evolving.
Okay.
And so when we can disprove one of the most famous evolutionary experiments in history, that tells me that evolution is not as solid as people think. And in fact, over and over, what we're finding is if we really carefully examine the evolutionary claims, they don't hold up.
Wow.
Okay, so now let's look at another biological experiment. This is a paper that I published with Rob Carter, and we studied the H1N1 influenza virus. Now, we've been hearing a lot about this virus as it's similar to COVID in that it caused such a horrible pandemic in 1918. But people were freezing samples of H1N1 for the last 100 years.
Okay.
And so we have a record, again, a record of all the mutations that accumulated in the virus. And the question is, was it getting better or worse? Now, this paper was published in a well-respected journal. It's been accessed over 17,000 times, 17,000. A lot of people have read our paper. No one's criticized it. And, and so there's no, basically, our research is unassailable. Here's what we found. As we looked at the different samples over the years, what we found was that the mutations were accumulating in a continuous way. Let's look at the upper line.
Okay.
Okay, so on the left-hand side, we see how many mutations have happened over time, and down below is time. So
yes,
they started freezing samples in 1930, and samples and up, and it stops at 2009.
Okay.
Why it stops at 2009. So during this time, what we see is that mutation count goes up perfectly linear. The lower line is just has to do with it's similar phenomenon, but involving proteins. We're looking at DNA mutations. So just look at the upper line.
Okay.
And we see that it's remarkable. The accumulation of mutations is like clockwork. You could predict where it's going to be 10 years later, right?
Yes.
And it's mutating at more than 10 mutations per generation. And over 1,000 mutations accumulated in this small virus. 10% of the whole genome mutated.
Wow.
And so we have a major problem here in terms of mutation accumulation. Maybe you can see that if it just keeps going up straight, it's inevitable that it has to go extinct.
Yes.
That you don't have any information around. So, so basically, what we showed was that the mutation was relentless, consistent. Now, the interesting thing is, you see, it goes from blue to red. And the dates, you look down by 1950, and then there's 2 slashes.
Right.
This virus went extinct in the early 1950s. Disappeared for 20 years, which is the gap in time.
Right.
And then it reappeared 20 years later. Where was it? Where was it hiding? Yes.
Viruses, they can hide in the DNA, can't they? In human DNA?
Not this virus, but they can hide in research freezers.
Oh, okay.
And it's widely acknowledged that something that shouldn't have been put in the freezer was put in the freezer, and eventually escaped the freezer. Does it sound a little bit like coronavirus? COVID virus? Just a little bit. It escaped, and then it picked up where it left off.
Okay.
They started accumulating mutations exactly where it left off. So 2 years in the freezer, and it came back out, and it continued the accumulation of mutations. Remarkable. Just such an interesting paper. We didn't know when we started to look at this that it would be so incredibly interesting. We just wanted to know, does genetic entropy apply to even something as simple as a virus? Virus you'd expect to be the most resistant to genetic entropy. But you can see viruses are not resistant. Now let's look at another graph. This graph is research done by other scientists who have been studying the same virus. What they show is that starting in 1980, so there's deaths on the left-hand column, and on the bottom we have dates.
Okay.
And what we can see is mutation count at the top. As mutation count went up, the fitness declined. So, so this box here, can you see my arrow?
No, sir, I cannot see your arrow.
Sorry, the first box in the upper left-hand corner.
Yes, sir.
Is the 1918 strain.
Okay.
Okay, and so it was incredibly virulent. It was super fit, and it was causing massive death.
Yes.
But within 2 years, it was greatly reduced in its virulence.
Yes.
Its ability to that cause death. And so its fitness, so to speak, or virulence went down exponentially. Can you see that?
Yes, sir.
And the last box is almost extinction, right? It means
Yes,
that it can't infect, can no longer infect people. And then the diamond, what is the diamond? In 2000, you see the little black diamond at the bottom?
Yes, sir.
Okay, that is when the human H1N1 strain went extinct.
Okay.
And it was in all the databases. People were sampling viruses. They sample which strains are increasing, which ones are decreasing. That's the last time anyone saw the human version of H1N1.
Huh.
That same year, the swine flu, which is it's similar to H1N1, but it was propagating and accumulating mutations in pigs.
Right.
It jumped into the human population. So now, so we didn't get rid of influenza. We got rid of the killer strain that was so horribly powerful in 1918. And how did it get? What do we see? We're seeing genetic entropy happening in a virus.
Yes.
Going
Wow.
from super virulent to extinction in less than 100 years.
Wow.
And so, what I believe personally that's happening with COVID. With time, it will attenuate and become increasingly less and less virulent. But not in the next few months. Unfortunately, we're going to have COVID around for a long time.
Yes.
Okay, so this is powerful biological data, both the Lenski experiment and our virus research. So genetic entropy in operation in the real world.
Yes.
So let me just summarize now what we have. Our numerical simulations, we're going to plot them, and then we're going to show the influenza data.
Okay.
Here we see under the Mendel, the numerical simulations, our numerical simulations show that mutation goes up linearly.
Yes.
Fitness goes down as a decay curve. Okay. Now let's look at the influenza data.
They're very close.
Wow. Now actually, two other virus strains, in addition to H1N1, were also plotted here. They show the same decay curve. Three different influenza viruses. They all start out virulent and dangerous. They all peter out. The other two are still around, but they're practically extinct.
Yes.
Can you add, Matt, do you think maybe our simulations might be, we did those before we did the data. Do you think that maybe our simulations are valid?
I think so. They seem to match the data.
They predict the data.
Yes.
It's stunning. Okay, so so there's 4 decay curves that I've shown you during this talk.
Yes, sir.
And the first one is the biblical data.
Yes.
Which is stunning, right?
Then
just a simple math. If the geneticists are right and we're declining at least 1% per generation, if you plot it, you get the biological decay curve.
Yes.
And in just 300 generations, you go from fully fit to nearly extinct, suggesting that there's no place for deep time.
Yes.
It's stunning. Then we look at our simulations, which shows the biological decay curve. And even if we play around with parameters like mutation rate or population size, we always get the same basic biological decay curve. And then we have the biological decay curve associated with the H1N1 virus. So,
wow.
So Ashley, could I give you more compelling evidence for genetic entropy?
It looks really compelling to me. I don't see, it's clear. It convinced me.
It's stunning. It's stunning. And basically, the evolutionists do not want to talk about this. And so, but basically our papers have been published that show it, and no one's contesting our papers.
Yes.
All we hear is silence. Wow. So genetic entropy is real. Here's the bad news. It's supported by scripture, it's supported by the laws of nature. It's obvious at the personal level. It's compelling in terms of population genetics and numerical simulations. Honest simulations confirm it, and viral and bacterial studies prove it.
Wow.
Oh, yeah, you and I said, wow, at the same time. It's like, when I started this research, I thought I was going to hit a brick wall. I did not think all of these things would line up with the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
And so thanks to outstanding collaborators, and by God's mercy, we've built a case against evolution that's just very compelling.
Very.
So because I brought you the bad news that we're all dying, which you knew, but that we're also dying due to mutation, I want to share with you the good news is everybody, atheists, Muslims, Christians, we should all realize our hope is not in this world, our hope is not in this body, and our hope is in heaven.
Yes.
And so we have to be heaven-centered. We have to be Christ-centered.
Yes.
Because there's no hope in this world. And so that's a profound thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so we come back to where we began. Let us encourage each other to believe God more and to believe man less.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Ashley. I really enjoyed walking through this with you.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Sanford. It was such a blessing to hear all this. So I believe we're open for questions now, and I hope everybody's been sending in their questions. And I know I have so much more to think about. Whew, wow. So if I will step away and James will come on and ask you a whole bunch of questions from people. Thank you, Dr. Sanford, for your time. And I praise God for the brain that he has given to you. So you've been able to figure out so many of these things along with all your collaborators over the years. So thank you so much for your hours and years of dedication in researching these things.
You're very welcome.
Do you like my my mug?
I actually can't see your mug because of the setup.
Oh, okay. Well, it's a Logos mug. So.
Oh, good. I love that. I think we should all have a Logos mug.
No, great presentation. Again, I completely agree. Some new stuff. Let me make sure I'm centered here. Okay, there we go. All right, several questions came in. I've been sitting here kind of, the ones that were similar, I was putting together in kind of the same bucket and sorting through them. One thing that I had that I was going to just ask you, since I can ask the first question, is that the Discovery Institute in Seattle, the big think tank behind, the intelligent design movement, well, they've been a big help to me, over the last probably 15 years. Just, they flew me to Seattle, did a lot of stuff, really good group of people. And Paul Nelson, one of their senior fellows, is also a member of Logos Associates. And when I was in Dallas this past February for their Science and Faith conference, I was able to ask Michael Behe, who I know is one of your authors in Biological Information, New Perspectives. And I asked him if he knew of even one beneficial mutation that actually added new information to the genome. And he said that none that he is aware of add any new information. Would you agree with that conclusion as well?
So let me say, I think Michael Behe has had just incredible impact, and that his research has been high level and really deep. I mean, he's dug into these issues really deep, and it's really cool that we've come to similar conclusions. I'm not aware of any specific mutation. Well, I actually would say there are probably beneficial mutations. Well, they're definitely beneficial mutations, but are they loss of function beneficial mutations? We were talking about throwing out the spare tire as a beneficial mutation because your car will have better mileage. All of the documented cases that I can see seem to be, even the beneficial ones are loss of function. So yes, they're not truly beneficial. They're only beneficial in a artificial sense. And so, but I wouldn't say that, I'm sure that if we look hard enough, we could find beneficial mutations that add information. Let me give you an example. If you have a rheostat, a dimmer on your light switch, you can change how bright the light is. Every gene has promoters, and it's like a dimmer, turns the gene on or off or somewhere in between. And mutations in the promoter, you can make promoters, you can make genes stronger or weaker depending upon mutations in the promoter. So I think within promoters, mutations can modulate in the same way a dimmer does. So when you change it, it's not that you've made it better, you've just made it either dimmer or brighter. So it's a really shallow type of new information, but in a very narrow sense, it has some value. But the main point is that overwhelmingly mutations are deleterious, and the few ones that are beneficial are consistently, I won't say always, but are consistently loss of function mutations.
Perfect. All right, we've got a question here from Pollyanna. If rate of mutations is on the rise each generation, why is life expectancy also increasing so much?
Yes. So the mutation rate, I think, is the same, but the accumulated mutations keeps growing because it's cumulative. It just keeps piling up generation after generation. Her question is a very good one, and the answer is very simple. We have developed medical technology, and we've developed better nutrition and better hygiene, and so science has helped us. Even though our genomes are degenerating, we have been able to boost our lifespan because of artificial interventions. But I think of myself, if I hadn't had 3 back surgeries, if I hadn't had glasses, if I hadn't had, I almost died in Mexico of food poisoning, except for medical interventions and technology, I would have been dead a long time ago. And so, the increase in longevity is a modest one, and it's basically artificial. But even if we could get to everybody to be 130 years old, we're still pretty young compared to Noah. So that's the answer. But it's Pollyanna, that's a great question.
Perfect. This question's, it's kind of I'll just read it. I really enjoy groups like Logos Research Associates. Enjoyed the talk last time with Humphreys and Baumgartner. Logos seems to not have so much of an agenda. For example, every speaker at Logos Associates I have seen speak doesn't badmouth the other side or old earth creationists like myself, which means a lot. Well, he says, I cannot stand some groups. He says AIG or ICR because they are so locked into a 4004 BC at midnight. So I want to thank you, Dr. Sanford, and ask how we can better shake awake these groups like AIG who just say, I probably shouldn't even use the name that he used, but yeah, too late. AIG who just asks, were you there? Or call other Christians compromisers who do not adhere to a strict 4004 BC at midnight. Thank you again. You are a testimony in a good way to recent creation.
All right. So that's I really appreciate that. So when Logos Research Associates formed, one of the first things we decided was that we needed to act like brethren to the Christians who don't agree with us. And so that was a policy that we set into effect. And we also said we have to be Christ-like. So we have to speak the truth in love. And so we've tried really hard to do that. I do see division and divisiveness within lots of different types of ministries. There's a certain competition that's going on. So I love the people at AIG and ICR and CMI And I've reached out an olive branch to the people at Reasons to Believe. I love those people as well. And we can differ in a civil way on many things. There are a lot of things that are not essential doctrines. So we want to be gracious. I've been having some interactions with Muslims and find that they are interested in creation as well. They believe in a literal Adam and Eve as well. And so I think we're supposed to love everybody, respect everybody, and encourage everybody, and just to get used to the fact that we don't agree on everything. We do have to stand against false teachers, but beyond that, we need to be gracious.
And this pretty much, I'll read it. It's very similar to the last question, but I'll go ahead and read it. Great talk, Dr. Sanford. I know groups, you know, like AIG have launched many ad hominem attacks against groups like the Discovery Institute, though most of them are devoted Christians, whereas you have worked with people like Michael Behe, Doug Axe, James Tours, etc. How can we better present such a clear and non-dogmatic approach to creation as you did in your talk tonight? I guess you'd pretty much say that's almost the same question the other individual asked.
So I think we have to really deliberately speak the truth in love, love and respect our unconditional, even our enemies. We have to love and respect, and and yet we do have to stand against false teachings. So the decision of what are simply reasonable differences versus doctrinally important truths is something we have to discern. It's not easy. And so I don't have any criticism of AIG or the other creation ministries, but I just say we at Logos Research Associates are committed to building better relationships with everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's coming. I think that will happen.
Amen. Let's see. Joey asks, I love contested bones, long overdue. Really love that it's in color, makes it much better. Question, I always enjoyed Jack Kuzo's work, Buried Alive, where he argues that the Neanderthals were humans and possibly really old humans that were caught in the middle period of genetic entropy when lifespans were declining rapidly after the flood. With the mapping of the human genome and the Neanderthal genome, it seems he was right in saying that we all would be shown to be related. But how has his theory of Neanderthals being old humans living after the flood to be 200 to 300 years old held up over the years? Should we conclude on this point that he was simply mistaken?
So I was really fascinated by his book also, and he was gracious enough. I went to visit him because I was very interested in what he was doing. And so I visited him in his home, and he was very gracious, and we talked about things. I don't think he's correct about Neanderthal or Homo erectus. Some people would like to put them as that that's what Adam and Eve looked like. The genetic evidence for Neanderthal, and when they find Homo erectus DNA, it'll be similar. It shows that Neanderthal had a lot of mutations and a lot of inbreeding. So the Neanderthals, one of the things that made them distinctive was they were seriously inbred. They must have branched away out of Babel very early and spread very widely because they're genetically very similar to each other, but they all show serious evidence of inbreeding. Inbreeding, of course, means that all the mutations that are there are manifested. So the bones, basically all the what they call early hominin, what we would just say isolated groups of human beings. Wherever there was inbreeding, you got pathologies, bone pathologies, skeletal pathologies, small size, reduced brain volume. So I don't think that's what Adam and Eve looked like. I think those are pathologies, and that actually Neanderthal was fully human, but suffering from inbreeding and skeletal pathologies.
Gotcha. This one's, I don't know if that's a backhanded compliment. Why is someone so smart like John Sanford, who invented the gene gun, a creationist? So,
well, to that person, I would say I once had the same viewpoint as you have. And so I have learned so much more about evolution since I became a creationist. Because as an evolutionist, it was just obvious. Everything was presented in the context of evolution. It was a given. It was an axiomatic belief. And so I never actually critically assessed the evidences. I just, oh yes, oh look, obviously that's a transitional form between ape and man. And so when I actually had to defend a creation position, I had to dig deeply into the data. And what I found was that the popular arguments fail, and that the better the evolutionists, the more they'll acknowledge they have problems. So I feel I've grown past being an evolutionist, and I've not only intellectually, but I've spiritually grown enormously by embracing and submitting to the Word of God.
Amen. Can you discuss how Fisher's famous theorem has been flipped and how this has held up today? I read the new paper by Bassner and Sanford in the Journal of Mathematical Biology, but was not sure if anyone engaged or attempted to refute your position or just ignore it.
Okay, so that's really an interesting story. Bill Bassner and I developed that paper. We knew that we had a really strong case, and when we published it, I haven't kept count, but maybe 15, 18,000 accesses, so it's been widely accessed. A lot of people have read it. There's only 2 people who tried to contest our argument, and their position wasn't that we were mathematically wrong, but that Fisher was irrelevant. So it was 2 members of the National Academy of Science. It was Michael Lynch and the other name escapes me right now, but another famous population geneticist. And they wrote on an atheist blog site, they said, who cares about this research by Bassner and Sanford? Fisher wasn't important. He was just a nobody. Well, he was the primary founder of neo-Darwinian theory. He went from just the armchair philosophy of Darwin to rigorous science with his mathematics. He was a famous mathematician. And so he's been cited in, I forget, something like 100,000 journals. One of the most cited papers ever is his research. And it was considered proof of evolution for decades. And so we responded to their criticism by just saying, here are some quotes from famous people saying that Fisher's theorem was the most important theorem and that it proves evolution. And then we just said, and here's a list of all the citations of Fisher's theorem. And they suddenly went silent. So they didn't, just to make really clear, no one, not even those 2 individuals, argued about our science. They tried to say Fisher was just a straw man for us. But we were refuting one of them, what was considered the most important theorem in biology. And we proved that it was, the way it was formulated was wrong. And no one's contested that. Hallelujah. Amazingly strong paper, just incredibly strong paper.
Okay, and that was that 2015? Is that right?
I think it's a little more recent than that, but I can't remember.
Okay.
If you just look up fish fundamental theorem of natural selection, and then either Bassner or Sanford, it'll pop up. And yeah, that was exciting because it was such a win. You know, sometimes you win, and in research you don't know how it's going to turn out. Turned out to be an incredible win. And not only did it show that Fisher was wrong, the founder of population genetics was wrong, it showed that basically things should degenerate. So it actually shows evidence for genetic entropy.
Fascinating. All right, question from Carolyn. William Lane Craig, an old Earth creationist / progressive creationist, has said young Earth creationism is an embarrassment. But over the years, he's come now to deny a historical Adam and Eve, a historical fall, a historical flood, and a historical Babel. Aren't these necessary for a Bible-believing Christian? He has also said he no longer considers himself an inerrantist, and he is okay with evolutionary creation or theistic evolution. Do you think by denying all of these major points of Genesis, you begin to have all of Christianity unwind in on itself?
So it's a really good question. So he's done great work as a Christian apologist. But once you start to cave into human authority rather than God's authority, you are on a slippery slope. And so once you say, well, I don't really believe in miraculous creation, and then once you say that, if you say you don't believe the first chapter of the Bible, then every time you run into a miracle or something that's supernatural, you go, well, maybe I don't believe in that either. It becomes a slippery slope. And so what you just described, I don't know if William, all those things have happened to him, but I grieve for him if that's what's happened, because he's on a slippery slope. And pretty soon you question the resurrection, you question everything else. He's on a slippery slope, and I would pray that he would just come back and set aside his pride and just submit to the word of God.
Amen. All right, next question. How much of your entropy argument has been refuted since your first edition of Genetic Entropy? It seems like in a lot of ways today, history and the social sciences, as well as the Bible, and all of the natural sciences outside of cosmology and astronomy are on the side of a recent creation. Is this a fair statement?
I think there's one question there, but we're getting a little feedback. I don't know if maybe we have too many microphones. I'm not sure what's going on. But anyway, I don't think except for typographical errors, I think my first edition is still correct. What's happened is every time we've made a new edition, we've added information, and all the information we've added consistently builds a stronger and stronger case. I'm about ready to take the last edition, which is I think 2014, and upgrade that again, because there's so many new lines of evidence that support genetic entropy, including a very recent paper by Michael Lynch, where he says that the way to stop COVID is by mutational degeneration of the virus. So I expected to be kind of crucified when I first published Genetic Entropy. It was so heretical from an evolutionary point of view. But I've tried to dialogue with the evolutionists. They don't want to talk to me. And at first I thought they were just being rude. I realized more and more. I said to a good friend of mine who's an evolutionist, but a friend, and he said, "Why won't they engage me?" he said, they don't have answers. And that's what I'm seeing, is there's been almost no attack of my work. The two people who have attacked my work was a mechanical engineer and a physicist. But there's no one in the biological realm that's questioned my findings. They just decide not to cite my work, and they ignore my work, and they won't answer emails. So that's where it is with that. I'm stunned at how God has so graciously given so much evidence in this arena. In geology, we're still one way I put it is, we've been delivered from Darwin. We have not yet been fully delivered from Lyell. Geology is much tougher. So it's easy. So right now, God is giving us all the biological evidence we could handle. It's just pouring in. And so it's like a heyday for the creation biologists. Geology continues to be a challenge, and there's some pretty exciting developments in geology as well, but not quite. The floodgates haven't yet been opened like biology. Biology it's a great time to be a creationist, is the way I would describe it.
Amen. Would you say that atheism and naturalism, intellectually speaking, are mostly dead today? In other words, the Anthony Flews and the Bertrand Russells are long gone, and it seems that literally all the evidence is on the side of ID or creation. So is the real battle against apathy not atheism today? If so, what is your suggestion on combating apathy? Or in other words, people just not caring?
So it's a great question, and I can totally relate to what that person is feeling. I do see apathy, even in biblical churches. Is it like, oh, we don't need to talk about creation? Well, they're losing their kids and grandkids to all these powerful lies. So apathy is totally inappropriate. Maybe a given person, is satisfied with the evidence, but their children or their nephew or their grandchildren are being decimated by powerful lies. I think that most of the really respectable evolutionists have been replaced by kind of angry, mean-spirited people who like to insult people rather than have a dialogue. That's too bad. I do believe that atheism is becoming much weaker, but it's being replaced by something much more frightening. To me, atheism is basically just old gray-haired men. There's no serious or credible atheists, I think, in the next generation to speak of. Again, just except angry people who are shaking their fist at God. But here's the threat, is what I call fluid spirituality. Nowadays, everybody's spiritual. Nobody's an atheist. Everybody believes in some type of spirituality, but it's a spirituality of your own making. So you can make up your own God, you can make up your own religion, you can, blend Hinduism and Christianity and Islam. It's all just man decides. Man decides what truth is. Man decides what God is like. Man decides if there's multiple gods or if there's just one God. And so it's like, it's still humanism, and it's what I call postmodernism. They don't. Most of these people who are have kind of a fluid sense of spirituality. They don't really believe anything's true. Therefore, you can make up your own story, and everybody, you have your truth and I have my truth. Everybody goes home with the satisfaction of having their own truth, but obviously they don't know God.
True. Let's see. And if you've read Nathaniel Jensen, this question is, what do you think about Nathaniel Jensen's modeling of historical mitochondrial DNA, the possibility that the three branches are Noah's daughter-in-law, and Y chromosome branch modeling?
So I confess I haven't had time to read his book, but I've seen his articles and I've seen his work. I have a lot of respect for him, and I believe he's on the right track. And so I'm delighted in his being one of his colleagues and would be happy to publish with him when the time is right. So I can't answer in detail those questions or critique them.
I know that he is a cell biologist with his PhD from Harvard, and I know I read through his book, and I know that he references your work and Rob Carter's, so I know he speaks highly of you. What was your motivation on sexual holocaust that you referenced at the beginning of this talk, if you don't mind me asking? I'm not that much into creationism, but tuned in because this topic really interests me. How much did Alfred Kinsey play in lighting the fuse to the problems we're seeing today in your estimation?
Okay, so I appreciate that person's interest. Like I said, the reason we did that research and wrote that book was because we began to realize how extensive the problem is and how devastating it is. I remember going to a talk at a apologetics conference where I'm getting old, so I start to forget names. But Josh McDowell presented on this problem of pornography among even little children, and he just showed so many statistics. And as at the end, I was so upset with what he was telling me. I said, "Stop the conference. We have to pray about this." That was my response. I didn't say that because instead someone up got up and said, "Well, thanks, Josh, for that. That was really interesting. Now our next speaker." And I was stunned because I said, "Don't they realize that this is devastating the world and that children are being corrupted from the earliest possible ages and that it's almost a universal, basically the anything goes sexuality is becoming almost a universal problem in the planet." And so, yeah, at that moment, I decided somebody has to address this issue. I hope it's not me, but if no one else will, I will, because this is the worst humanitarian crisis since the flood.
No, that's great. That's great. We're definitely going to, I know Stephen is going to be sharing a lot of those links during and after this talk. I know we're getting close on time. We've got 4 more questions, looks like. We'll try to get through those quickly, and then I'll let Stephen close us out. And definitely, like I said, on the getting plugged into IAC, I've got all kinds of free goodies that I'll just set up before we get to these 4 questions from the last meeting. Tons of them that I'll send you if you sign up for IAC. God's Not Dead. It was interesting. I got to meet with Kevin Sorbo, who's also a creationist, and in March, and the book that also references the movie. Bunch of different goodies, and most of you, if you tuned into the other talk, you got the Dr. Sanford's How Darwin Got It Wrong. If you didn't, let me know, and I'll definitely send you a copy of that. But anyway, Stephen will talk more about that after we finish these last 4 questions. This person, Bob, I have worked with Walt Brown, a creationist in the past, who has taken a lot of heat for not bowing a knee to other creationist organizations, but he speaks very highly of your work and your demeanor. Do you have any advice for groups? And it's kind of a similar question as before. They're saying that aren't really that big into ICR and AIG, but they really, do agree with, the merits. How do we get plugged into knowing more about Logos Research Associates? And I know this isn't a us against them mentality, but how do we get creationist groups to raise the bar more in the 21st century instead of still acting like it's the 20th century?
So I do believe that the creation movement is kind of in the 20th century, and so they're not. I think that's an issue. And that's why they're not as attuned to this problem of fluid spirituality, which is basically that what I don't have generation XYZ. I just call it the next generation. And you're all of you are kids compared to me. So I just look at you guys as the future of the world. So that's why I want to encourage you all. But okay, help me come back to what we were talking about. So basically getting the tone right is basically, first and foremost, we have to be Christians. So we have to be Christ-like. And if we don't have that, we should just sit down, because all the science in the world isn't as good as just being Christ-like. And so we have to be Christ-like. It's not an option. And we have to treat each other as brethren, even if we're completely convinced that the other person is 100% wrong. We're still brethren. And so we must treat each other with love and respect. We're even supposed to love and respect the people who are our enemies. How much more should we love and respect our brethren? It doesn't mean we don't confront false teachers, but it means that only under severe situations do we need to go to that extreme. Otherwise, we should be using graciousness and civil dialogue.
This one came in, and it's not really, I'll go ahead and ask it, even though it doesn't really have to do with your talk. Just if you wanted to maybe reference a different one, or like a different site, like John Baumgartner's or something. Geology is overwhelmingly on the favor of an ancient Earth, and Genesis does not tell us the age of the universe. And I think that's it. It's not. It looks more like it's a statement, but than a question. But you know, again, we had Dr. Baumgartner on here last time, so I didn't know if you had it, if you wanted to add your 2 cents. But also globalflood.org, I believe, is his website, and then also logosresearchassociates.org. I noticed that Dr. Baumgartner has some of his latest research up there now.
That's right. So basically, the person who is asking this question is, even if you, I'll tell you, I'm really glad I'm not a geologist or a cosmologist, because God hasn't delivered us entirely from those things. There are things that we have to acknowledge we don't know, or that we don't have answers to. I think distant starlight is an issue like that. I think geology, it seems overwhelmingly persuasive, but but I'd just like to say that just 20 years ago, the evolutionary argument seemed overwhelmingly persuasive. When I actually started to get engaged in the creation movement 20 years ago, I thought that I would fail miserably. I would try my best, but they would just chew me up and spit me out. And everything's changed biologically now. Doors have opened that we couldn't have even imagined. And we're not quite in that place for cosmology and geology. So if I was cosmologist or geologist, I would present my position with great humility, knowing that it seems crazy to much of the world. But there are evidences for the flood, for a young creation, and for a young universe. But it's not the type of slam dunk evidences that we have in biology. So it's a good place for lots of humility. But I'd just like to add to that person's comment. A lot of things that seemed impossible to me a while back, when eventually God showed me something that delivered me from that stronghold, or that that seemed like a insurmountable evidence. And that's happened. I've had talked with Rob Carter. We both have found things that seemed really strong, and we're kind of like intimidated. And when we dug deep enough, we found that actually it was being misrepresented. But I respect their point of view that there's, you know, at first glance, it seems like the universe, well, given the training that we're given, it seems old. From a child's point of view, they look at things and they see things new. I'm looking out a window right now, and I see trees and grass as far as the eye can see, and it's all just decades old. And I look at the clouds floating by, and they're just hours old, and yet they're big and they're majestic, and they look like they're going to last forever, but then those clouds dissipate in a moment. So the appearance of age is actually significantly impacted by a frame of mind.
Perfect. And last two questions. Oh, good. They're from different angles. First question, I really enjoyed Contested Bones, and it was long overdue because Bones of Contention is just too out of date today. What type of impact have you seen by both secular and creationist circles? How do we get this book out there more? And as a side note, I heard that you and Rob Carter were working on a book on Adam and Eve. Is this true?
We are working on a book on Adam and Eve. We have great evidences and a great case. We're both busy with too many things, so we're having trouble getting it done, but we have all the information we need. And so that's the first point. Let's see, going back to, there's two questions there, help me out. I forget what the other question was, but what's the
Oh, it was, oops, back there. It was mostly just that they love Contested Bones, and then what is the overall impact from secular and creationist circles? And basically it looks like they're alluding to, have the secularists just pretty much ignored it? And then how do we get this in front of more people?
So it's a good read, given that it's very technical and very comprehensive. Most people have told us that it was easy to read. My granddaughter at 8 years old has been reading it. And so she obviously doesn't understand all the terminology, but she gets the ideas. So it is totally, it strengthens our case in terms of the hominin bones massively, massively. Very important. It's not getting promoted much. Logos RA doesn't have much visibility. And so we're dependent upon the creation ministries to get things out. And it's not just that they sell it, they have to promote it or it doesn't get out. So we're frustrated that right now Contested Bones, even though it's super advancement, super encouragement for creationists, and we don't know how to get traction. We're not good at marketing. We don't market our own work, and we don't even know how to market our books. We're not self-promoters. That's part of the character of our group, I think. So that's the bottom line.
And the last question this evening, before we kick it back over to Stephen, you know, and first of all, I would just like to say again, and Stephen, I don't know if you want to flash the different websites up there. Obviously, logosresearchassociates.org, which is the entire conglomerate where Dr. Sanford is president. The genetic entropy.org or .com?
Everything.org.
.org. And then contestedbones.org. And again, I can't, you know, recommend enough. You know, it was interesting because Bones of Contention, which I think, you know, it was a good book in its time. I think this is a whole nother level up there above it. And I mean, like the one commenter said, again, you can't really tell, the fact that everything's color, but the book doesn't, I mean, it's not that much more expensive for it being color, adds so much to it. So I definitely encourage you, whether it be a secularist, order a copy, refute it. If it's a church group, anyone, definitely get plugged in. And the co-author, Chris Roop, should be also one of our featured speakers next month. And the month after that is Jay Seegert. One thing Jay Seegert's going to focus on is, just to start spreading the word, is how do you get this more in front of your churches, your schools, your home schools. And if you're interested in creation science, creation history, this will be a very good time, because Jay Seegert is very fluid. He's able to make something that can be complicated very simple. So definitely, once Steven starts plugging in on IAC, definitely make sure you get signed up there for the future talks and different things we're going to be doing with different researchers and groups with Logos researchers. Last question. Would the waiting time problem for genetic entropy still be a problem in secular science without an inference to the Bible? In other words, do you think genetic entropy still leads us to a relatively young age for humanity, even if the Bible didn't factor into it? Do you think the evidence speaks for itself on recent creation, at least of humanity, or are you being pushed to these conclusions based on the Bible?
So when I started to look at the issue of genetic entropy, I thought I could put a little ding in the armor of the evolutionary theory, and I didn't realize that we would have such a big impact. Help me again, because I'm getting tired and I'm not remembering questions very well.
It's basically saying, do we still have a problem with genetic entropy,
right.
even without the Bible? Like, you would still say, look, I'm not just letting the Bible force me to genetic entropy. Even if you weren't a Christian, in other words, you'd still be looking at this saying, look, there's a big genetic entropy problem here that is supporting this evidence that's in the Bible. It's not just me.
Okay. So we wrote the book Contested Bones without alluding to a young Earth ever, and we used the natural dates, but we just showed that the dates that they're using are wrong. We don't put in biblical dates. We just show that their dates are off, and that their storyline breaks down. So we don't even reference young Earth, and in genetic entropy, I don't talk about young Earth. So that a person can read our Contested Bones or genetic entropy, who's an old earther, and have no discomfort at all. And so the research we're doing doesn't hinge upon the Bible or young Earth. It hinges upon biology and genetics. So yes, the waiting time shows that there can't be deep time. And genetic entropy shows there can't be deep time. But we don't even bother pointing that out, because we actually want people to read the book. And if we say this is proof of the young Earth, then most people won't read it. There's no reason why reasons to believe shouldn't carry genetic entropy and even Contested Bones. They should buy into that. They should be willing to promote it. There's no geology associated with it.
With that, this is where I would normally ask the crowd to stand up and give an applause. Since the new ways of working have us in online and Zoom, I will just say sincere thank you. I think it was 2016 when I first was able to host you at the university setting. And even to my surprise, that was a good crowd, lots of good questions. I remember they just kept asking you questions till after 10, and you finally had to say, look, I love the questions, but I need to go to bed. So again, thank you so much. As always, it's an honor. And Stephen, I'm going to kick it back over to you to get your final thoughts, and definitely look forward to future discussions with other Logos Research Associates.
All right, thank you so much, everybody. And it's so good to have seen everyone coming on and interacting in the comments. If you're watching this on recording, thanks for joining us as well. As James had been talking about, we will be having more of these discussions in the months ahead. So I believe Chris Roop will be joining us to discuss more about contested bones, and there'll be a few other people in the months to come, like Jay Siegert and a few others as well, to touch on some of the topics that Dr. Sanford went over, and they'll be talking about them more in depth. So I just wanted to touch base with you guys kind of about the ministry. So International Association for Creation, we partner with Logos Research Associates on these events. So we're so thankful to have so many of the PhD scientists and other experts from Logos joining us. And it's just such a pleasure to be able to host you guys and to have these important discussions that not only share about the validity of the science, but also point us back to, the ultimate scientist, right, who is Jesus and God. And so I guess the first human scientist was Adam, right? And so he was a zoologist and a botanist and all these great things. And we get to follow in his footsteps and learning about how God created the world and help it, that information that we learn, not just to be facts in our heads, right, but to help us understand more about God's created order and these types of things. So if you're interested in learning more about how you can get involved in these events that are coming up, and we have events throughout the month, so if you're not part of our list, make sure that you comment below, get in touch with us, and we will make sure that we send you guys out updates. But I want to put up a website here. It's christianmuseumtours.com. And if you go to that website, we actually, as I mentioned in the beginning of the presentation tonight, we give virtual and live creation tours of secular museums, zoos, aquariums, and planetariums all around the United States and other major metropolitan areas abroad as well. And so you definitely want to sign up for those. That's a great way to get plugged in at IAC and kind of get your feet wet with what we do and providing that biblical worldview education to the nations. So we'd love to have you join us. Again, the website's right there, christianmuseumtours.com. It's all one word. You can actually sign up to take a tour with us, and we'd love to see you there. So hopefully we'll see you, whether it's on a tour or the next live event we have here. And you can always reach out to us through our website via email if you have any questions, and we'd be glad to help and answer those. So thanks so much again for joining us. My name is Stephen Policastro, and for James Stroud and the rest of the crew here tonight, we thank you all so much for joining us, and God bless you.